panelists on stage? We invite the panelists on stage. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to invite the panelists to join me on stage, if we could, please. They all said they'd rather walk up from the audience, but well, before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Boandik people. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and future. I'm a Koori man from northwestern New South Wales, from Tamworth. I've been working for the last 9 years at Flinders University in Adelaide and in the Northern Territory, but it's only my second trip to Mount Gambier, so I'm really pleased to be here. Okay, I'll introduce the members of the panel one by one as they come up, but I'd been asked to give a little bit of a background, a context for today's discussion, and it's going to be a discussion. We've asked the various panel members to give us about 5 minutes each of their experience of negotiating their training as a health professional. And working from those insights, we might throw it open for 10 or 15 minutes after that to get your questions or comments from the floor and tease out some of the things that get in the road of turning out an Indigenous health professional who's ready to roll, and some of the things that support that journey, because it is quite a journey, as I'm sure you'll hear. So we've called it, You Can't Be What You Can't See. And I think that'll become clearer as we go along. In terms of seeing oneself, not just in curriculum, which is very important, but in perhaps the processes of the university and the training settings as well. And we can talk about that. So how do we negotiate university to successfully graduate as an Indigenous health professional we're going to talk about today? So just to set the scene a little bit, here in Australia, Universities Australia has put out a document fairly recently, which is their considered strategy over a 3-year period. It's an important document. It finally says from the combined universities, we're going to take this seriously and put some grunt behind it. Let's just take one element of that, which is keep enrolling students in undergraduate courses, retain those students through their study, and successfully graduating those students. And so from Universities Australia figures, in the 6 years prior to the strategy happening, there was a great increase in enrolments, roughly twice the rate of non-Indigenous students enrolling. A major success, but not the only story. If you look at how successfully those universities retained those students through the course of their study, it was only 2% greater than the non-Indigenous students. Something's happening there. Now, if you look at completions, successful graduation, still graduating at only 2/3 the rate of the non-Indigenous students. And that's not necessarily great either. It's not a fall off in non-Indigenous students. So what's happening? What's going down? That's meaning that those people who do get into university, actually entrants, do not necessarily translate into graduations at the end, just like that. There are some clues, and one of the clues that might relate to today's panel comes from, press the right button, comes from Charles Darwin University, and the Office of the Pro Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Strategy, Steve Larkin's office, commissioned a study. That study came out as Strengthening Evaluation in Indigenous Higher Education Contexts in Australia. And what it found was that there is a great push, I guess a really worthwhile and well-intentioned push to get more bums on seats, to use the vernacular, to get the numbers up. But that push has been so strong, sometimes it suggests, this study, we've focused on objective measures without digging down into the qualitative stuff. What is it that helps a person succeed? What is it that gets in the road? And so they've asked for a much more focus on narrative, on student narratives, on student experience, qualitative data to tell us how well people are or aren't going, and crucially, not just the individual, how well the universities are rising to the challenge. It's a whole of university job, a whole of village, a whole of university job. So they actually state that stories and narratives should be explicitly incorporated into reporting, if that's what makes things change, and evaluation processes, and they provide a legitimate and culturally relevant and contextual source of evidence for how we get students through courses, including health professional courses. I'll just take a couple of minutes quickly to show that what it's meant for me is to listen to what students and graduating professionals have to say. It came home to me most strongly a few years ago. Some of you may know of LIME, Leaders in Indigenous Medical Education. It's a trans-Tasman grouping, a very successful grouping. And a couple of conferences back at Townsville, there's a Townsville sunset you can see in the background there. Some years ago at Townsville, the medical students from both Australia and New Zealand had a panel, and they wanted to talk about their experiences. And it was quite powerful, their experiences of study of medicine at university. And they came to me individually, they talked in different settings and different sessions about their experiences. And out of that, we started to build, if you like, a storehouse of student experience of what they said was working for them and what was getting in the road of their university experience. And they said things like this. They felt a lot of dilemmas. They felt that they were being put on the spot. What do you say when they start talking down Indigenous people to you or in front of you? What do you say or don't say when they question your indigeneity? How do you react when you even get put down by your own mob or someone else questions your heritage? And they put up some surprising things too. And they said, look, it's not just about being defensive about our indigeneity. People would do the opposite. They'd come to us expecting us to be like faculty, to have all the answers. We're expected to be the fount of all knowledge. The first dot point here really gets me, you know, asking a first-year medical student, is fetal alcohol syndrome a reason why there's an increased incarceration rate of Aboriginal youth? I mean, you know, putting people on the spot when they're trying to be students, when they're actually trying to be students and learn. What does connection to country mean? So they were the lightning rod they felt for all things Indigenous, and it was an unfair burden, an unfair burden. And finally, they reported comments like these, really derogatory comments, really something out of a different era in terms of colonisation, put down and racism. How Indigenous are you? How much Aboriginal are you? What part Aboriginal are you? And people say, oh, my left foot or my right foot, basically. You know? Is your dad's skin black? How offensive can you get? And this one is interesting. The final dot point there is interesting and thought-provoking because it came from someone's supervisor. I don't remember there being Aboriginal people in that area. What's your family name? So a non-Aboriginal person who had power over that student's success or otherwise is questioning their right to be there to who they are. Important stuff in terms of student experience. So I think I'll just leave it there, set the scene a little bit and say there's as much to be learned from experience, from narrative, to question the individual or to look for the individual enablers and barriers, but what's also going down in terms of people's home communities, what's going down in terms of the university per se, that actually make that journey a possible one. So we haven't decided who's going to talk first. I guess I'll just have to spring it on people. Maybe if we can start. Justin, would you like to be the first? I'll just introduce Justin. And I must confess, the slides we had today saying, you know, have I got any particular interest I should declare I know a few of these people. And I've been there when they were being educated, so that's my declaration. But apart from that, no declarations. Justin's a Wiradjuri fellow and currently works as a GP registrar at the Royal Flying Doctor Service, the Clive Bishop Medical Centre in Broken Hill, and also doing clinic and retrieval work, and at the Broken Hill Hospital doing anaesthetics. Justin actually graduated from Flinders University, spent 2 years working here in Mount Gambier, before going to my hometown of Tamworth, and then now back to Broken Hill. So, Justin Gladman.
Afternoon, everybody. So as Dennis has mentioned and kind of highlighted to some of the barriers or negotiations that are required in terms of getting through med school. As you mentioned, I went through Flinders, did a couple of years in Mount Gambier, and then moved on to do my undergraduate training. So I think in the words of one of our lecturers, I think being a Flinders graduate makes you knowledgeable but yet empathic. So anyone knows the liver specialist that used to give us lectures. He used to always start with that. Dennis touched on some very pertinent points earlier on. As a student, I've spent a number of hours in Dennis's office, sobbing on his shoulder, and also Auntie Lucy's for that matter. For a lot of us, the issues around being able to balance multiple different balls at any one time, and one of the guest speakers yesterday mentioned around the context of what community was, and a lot of us have are members of multitude of different communities, that being our own communities, whether that be geographical, whether that be in a cultural context. There's also the medical community that you're a member of, as well as faculty and teaching and things like that. So I also sit on the Australian Medical Council Assessment Committee and the Indigenous Reference Group and a few other stuff. So my membership across a number of multitude of different facets has to be balanced, as well as what my particular community expectations are. And I think in terms of the university and the support that they can provide is really acknowledging that at any one time your membership changes, and hence your responsibilities change, your community responsibilities change depending on the context in which that is particularly held. And that was certainly one of the major influences of me getting through med school was that acknowledgement that was there. And my community responsibilities came first, and always will. But also that given individual backgrounds and so forth, presented its own challenges. So I did public health first before I went to Flinders, so it's not a particularly strong science background. But once again, after sobbing on Dennis's shoulder numerous times about acknowledging that and then working through it. But the staff being approachable and also accessible was one of the main factors that actually contributed to me being able to progress through, and the acknowledgement that there were some barriers that needed to be overcome in order to actually achieve that and get to an endpoint. I think as a student cohort was also having the student support, particularly from the later years of the course who had similar experiences, to be able to touch base with them as well, and to see, as the opening slide said, you can't be what you can't see. And it's a matter of connecting with those people and acknowledging that it is doable and it certainly is possible. And I think the university has come a long way in acknowledging that and putting support mechanisms and structures in place. And no doubt we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Thank you.
I know how much this fellow had to persevere. It's quite an achievement. And I think, as well as his Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander supporters, the staff here, you'd acknowledge, I'm sure, at Mount Gambier, and Lucy Walters, Janine Greenhill and others played a part. Okay, I'd like to ask Donald if he'd like to come up and have a yarn to us. And Donald's been over 25 years working in public health and health promotion with, I think, the Queensland Health Department, was it, Donald? Queensland Health, State Health Department. In 2011, he joined James Cook in Townsville, for those of you who are from Canada or elsewhere, James Cook University in Tropical North, as an academic teaching, coordinating Indigenous components of the curriculum and recruitment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into the program. And Donald's also very heavily involved with community engagement work. Donald Welbeck.
Thank you, Dennis. I just want to start just to give a picture of where I'm from. So, a Torres Strait Islander man from the Pabri Nation of the Torres Strait. For those of you who aren't familiar with our region, this is the group of islands between the tip of Queensland and Papua New Guinea. So we're the other Indigenous group as part of the Indigenous nations here in Australia. So as a visitor to this area, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of country here. And I am a visitor here, and I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words and being part of the panel. I guess I'll just first of all say that I'm not, I guess, here as the as a student or a medical, graduate pathway, but certainly someone who has a strong interest in education. And my background is public health, and my interest in education, I guess, stems from when my father graduated, and he graduated in education. And this was back in 1985. So he's someone that spent 20 plus years, in the workforce doing odd things here and there, and then decided that he was going off to uni and, challenge all things. And so when we talk about things about, you can't be what you can't see, he certainly provided that for us, for the family, that he was a role model in community, and it was able to inspire myself and others to pursue education. So of course I thought, well, this is great, I'm going to take that up, and finished high school and went to university, and applied to get in university, James Cook, in Townsville, and that was to do education, but I didn't get in, so didn't get through the interview and I wasn't accepted. But when I look back at it now, there was one key thing that really stood out, was that there wasn't any other options or pathway, like where do you go from here? And what advice is given to someone straight out of school about what pathway you take in order to progress your educational career. So I left and went and did some odd jobs around the place again, and then later enrolled in a program for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health workers. So that gave me some insight into the field of health, and took me in a bit of a roundabout journey back into education. Okay, but the journey of health has been a very valuable one for me, but also for my family and for my community, because it allowed me to engage a lot better and a lot more in building capacity within my community through that form of education and through health learning. So here I am at JCU, and my role there is teaching at the College of Medicine, but I also play a role in terms of looking at Indigenous recruitment into the area too, for the College of Medicine and Dentistry, but also across the other discipline areas. And I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later on. But it certainly highlights, when I take the step back to when it all began and not having this pathway option, it really made me realise and stuck with me in terms of how important those sort of things are for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students that are coming through and are looking at engaging and being enrolled in that space. So I won't say any more, I'll leave it there, and we'll look forward to the discussion for the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. That's great. Perhaps, Carrie, would you like to speak next? I'll just introduce you. And I should say before I introduce Carrie, in a sense, I neglected to say when I said about Universities Australia, how much Universities Canada is in this space as well. And certainly I think we're behind Canada in the recognition that Universities Canada gave to indigenising the university and decolonising the academy in their output of 2015. So we still haven't picked up that ball to say it's not just enough to see yourself in the curriculum, but what about the processes of the university? Can we decolonise the processes of the university themselves to make this educational journey, a better one? So Carrie is chair of HR in Indigenous and Northern Health and senior scientist at Health Sciences North Research Institute in Sudbury, Ontario, and the scientific director of the Institute of Aboriginal People's Health at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And prior to taking the chair in October 2016, and the scientific director position in February 2017, she served her communities as a professor of Indigenous Health Studies at First Nations University of Canada for 15 years. And Carrie is Métis, belonging to the Regina Real Métis Council 34. Have I got it right? Carrie Barassa.
Miigwech, thank you. I want to acknowledge that I'm in your traditional lands of country, and thank you so much for having me. So I did just make a recent change, and I moved the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health from Sudbury recently back to my home territory, or close to my home territory, in Saskatchewan, to the University of Saskatchewan. And I'm a professor there in the College of Medicine, Department of Community Health and Epidemiology. So a very recent change, and certainly no time to change the bio. So it's certainly nobody's fault, but I did want to, of course, give a shout out to my new home. And it's interesting because, of course, I'm not a physician. I actually have a PhD in social studies and my master's in political science. But I think I bring a really interesting perspective, and I've always been in health studies. However, I really did want to be a physician. Growing up, I was the first to ever go past grade 8. My grandfather raised me, and he had grade 3. My mom had grade 8. So I was the first to graduate high school. I was the first to go on to university. And I always get choked up talking about this. I don't know why. I think it's my grandfather's spirit, so forgive me. But I didn't think I could do it. And I think that gave me the drive to do the kinds of recruitment that I do in Indigenous health. And so I helped to create a program at First Nations University. It was called the Bachelor of Health Studies. And in a way, it wasn't meant to trick students, but it was a way to give students pathways, because I didn't think I could ever be a physician, because I didn't think I was smart enough. And that is how many, many Indigenous students feel. And we need to create those culturally safe environments. So when I became a faculty member there, I was given this Indigenous health program, and it really wasn't a program, it was a certificate. And it had all of these science courses and 2 Indigenous health courses. And the Indigenous health courses were always full, which is what I taught. And I thought to myself, look, there's a craving here. The students want this. But we didn't have any money. We were a federated college. So I went over, and I don't know if anybody knows Dr. Craig Chamberlain, but he was a brand new dean then. I walked over there, this is no word of a lie, and I said, we need to create an Indigenous health program. And he said, well, that's not gonna fly. I said, okay, let's create a Bachelor of Health Studies program with a core Indigenous health, and let's create pathways to different areas. One being that they can go into medical school, one being that they can do a post degree in nursing, and other pathways into different health professions. And to this day, it was the first program of its kind in Canada, and it is still the most successful program in Canada and at the University of Regina in terms of the kind of interdisciplinarity. And for him to take a leap of faith and do that and invest in that, it's still a partnership with First Nations University of Canada, but actually it is more successful at the University of Regina than at First Nations University. But that really created that opening for students to start to see that they could, in fact, become physicians if they want to. And there's so many success stories now where because they had to take biology, they had to take stats, even if they weren't going to go into the medical profession, and that was their opening. But the thing is, you have to create the opportunity so that it's their self-esteem, that they can do it. And the look on their faces when they realized, hey, I passed that biology course, I passed that stats course. That is really what we have to do. And I know my time's almost up, but it's really what it's about. If you want to talk recruitment and retention, it is about creating the safe space, ensuring that they have access to elders and knowledge keepers, ensuring that they have access to additional counseling and writing clinics and the tutors. I mean, finding tutors sometimes was such a struggle, but that is what they need. So it's creating that culturally safe space and ensuring the curriculum is culturally safe as well, and we can have some more discussion about that again. But anyway, it's really an honor to be here, Miigwech.
I think no one need to apologise for feeling emotional about this stuff. It's real. Sometimes it's raw. It happens to me. I've been saved numerous times by my non-Indigenous counterparts when I'm giving us a workshop and something churns me up. So it's very real. Many of us were the first in our family to go to university, and certainly it's very real. Thank you, Carrie. There's just one thing you said about pathways, and I think pathways is something we need to talk about, and universities seriously need to talk about pathways into study of the health disciplines. And I was part of a study some years ago in southern New South Wales where they invited Aboriginal students down from all the country areas in the west of the Divide to a camp for 3 days to look at pathways into the study of health. And we got out of that the same thing as you said. We found the actual people who should be advising the students in schools were saying, no, you can't do medicine, you can't do this, you can't do that, and selling them short. And we found exactly the same thing as you was mentioning, when you had, that success bred success. When you have small successes and you take a kind of a pebble stone approach from that pebble to that stone to that stepping stone, each time with success, you get where you want to go. So I think there's a few lessons there from what you were saying. Okay, I'd like to ask Yarrachi if she'd like to come and talk to us. And Yarrachi is another, I'll get her back off from this mic a bit. Yarrachi is another person at Flinders who's well on her way to being a medical practitioner through Flinders University. A Yankini Jara person, thank you, I've been learning, and Jaru from north of Western Australia as well. Yarrachi in her final year as a medical student, and she's done a lot of work organising the other students and helping students grapple with issues in their various roles at Flinders. Yarrachi.
First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we're having this conference today. Way baya ngailo ini Yarrachinya, ngaigo ngunju, kunyinya, balaro, minmaku, yankunjada, muno, naigo, papa, jaro. So, first of all, I just wanted to tell you that my name is Yarrachi. My mum, she comes from the Yankunjada land, so that's the Y of the APY lands. My father is Jaro, so he comes from the Kimberley, so Halls Creek, 800 k's up the highway from Broome. Medicine was never my dream. I'd never dreamed to be a doctor. When I was in Year 9, my maths and science teacher told me that I was incapable of doing maths and science. And she said this at a parent-teacher night in front of parents and my peers. So I decided to head down the arts route. So I did a Bachelor of Creative Arts and Creative Writing. Halfway through my honours, my mum had a heart attack, and I actually did the CPR for my mum at 11 o'clock at night. The ambulances came, she went to hospital, they induced her in a coma. This was back in 2006, and my mum is still alive today. The cardiologist told me at 2 o'clock in the morning at Queen Liz that my mum was very lucky. She had 2 people in the house who knew how to do CPR, who did it within a minute or 2, and that we called the ambulance and we got her to the hospital as soon as possible. It was at that point I started thinking, what more could I do with myself? You know, I did CPR for my mum, and it took me a while to get the confidence to actually do the GAMSAT. I actually paid for it twice. I never sat it. Very expensive. It wasn't until the Post Centre approached me and talked to me about the PMP program, and I said, well, there's your last excuse gone because you don't have to do the GAMSAT anymore. You know, getting into medicine, it was a whole new culture. My very first PBL, I remember sitting there going, what's a baroreceptor? They're all talking about a baroreceptor, and I don't know what it is. I thought that, you know, my life in the first couple of years was constantly looking up the medical dictionary and then looking up the definition for the words of the first definition that I looked up, and then looking at more definitions. because it was a whole new language. I was not prepared for medicine. If I'd known that I was going to be a doctor, I would have done maths and science in high school. I would have done, because Flinders is a postgraduate degree, I would have done pharmacy or done physio or, something that would better equip me for studying medicine, because those students were like, first year and second year had it really easy, I thought. But the thing is, as an Indigenous student, to the medical students, they know that I'm Indigenous. They can tell by my name, they can tell by how I look, I fit their stereotype. And they always, there was the insinuation that I had gotten in the easy way. And I never really took the time to tell them that no, my way was not the easiest way. I came through a very roundabout way into medicine. But, my mum said I was born stubborn, and medicine is a degree that you have to be very resilient, very persistent. I became the Indigenous officer when I was in third year, which seems to be a crazy thing to do, but I needed a way to celebrate my identity, because in medicine, not always popular to be Indigenous, The amount of times I've outed other Indigenous students to the general population because they've kept their identity to themselves as a protective mechanism. And I don't blame them or, accuse them of anything. We all need to get through medicine, and if that's the way that they need to do it, then, we need more Indigenous doctors out there. So what I did as the Indigenous officer, I butted heads a lot with the university. I did Flinders University's first ever anti-racism campaign, which I held in first semester and second semester. I got the medical societies, so Flinders University Surgical Society as well as Medical Society, to have their first ever Indigenous officers, because what I recognised as being the Indigenous officer for the university, that this opened up doors for me. It connected me to people, and it's helped me to go in the direction I want to go within medicine. And I decided that the other Indigenous students also needed this, so I messaged the presidents and said, why don't you have an Indigenous officer? Please explain, because I understand with medicine it's all about hierarchy, and I knew that I sat above the student presidents of this society because I sat with the university council, student council. My legacy, as I am 2 days, 6 weeks away and from graduating, as well as 3 assignments, is that we had student elections last week and I campaigned heavily. I worked on the weekends to get time off, because we now, as outgoing Indigenous officer, the incoming Indigenous officer is a third-year medical student, third-year Indigenous medical student, who'll be taking on this role. And I said to her, you understand when you take this role on, you have to pay it forward and create opportunities for the other Indigenous medical students.
Perseverance, perseverance. Stubbornness can be a virtue. And I know more of the story too, and it's really been perseverance. Andrea, could we finish off this part of it with you? And I came to know Andrea in the last couple of years. I tried to entice her to work with us at Flinders, but Adelaide had grabbed her already, so she's on the other side of town. But originally from northern Western Australia, Bari. We had this conversation, I still get it wrong. Gidja woman from the far north of Western Australia, of course. And medical graduate and working as a lecturer at Adelaide University and doing her PhD with Dr. Dave Paul and others. That's enough. Andrew.
Afternoon, everyone. Yes, as Dennis introduced, I'm Andrea. I'm Gidja from the Kimberley, which is neighbours to Jari. It's a privilege to get to come to talk to you today a little bit about my journey into medicine, because I had some great opportunities that enabled me to have the opportunity to get into a health-related degree. So currently I work at Adelaide University around curriculum development for the years 1 to 6 medical students to build their capacities to work effectively with our community on graduation. But part of the role is about how we also enable access to tertiary health degrees for Aboriginal populations, because we know at the moment that our workforce needs to be strengthened and built so that we can work towards a really safe healthcare workforce in the social justice and the health equity agenda. So we have made a few changes at Adelaide Uni, but we have a long way to go. And just thinking back to how I got into medicine is a good reflection on some of the things that worked really well. So I was very lucky. I never thought that medicine was not something I ever thought I would do. I finished year 12 and my career counselling had been, are you sure you want to do physio? Be realistic, that's quite a hard degree. But then I got contacted by the university and they asked if I would like to try out a pre-medicine program, which I thought was a bit of a joke, and sort of laughed and threw the application in the bin that my mum then pulled out, said, no, you should try this. Because I hadn't done the UMAT, so I thought at the time that the UMAT was the test you did that would tell you if you would suit and be a good doctor, which I later found out it was not that, it was more of a filter for interviews. So I wasn't required to sit the UMAT, and I had the opportunity to do 6 weeks of medicine-related topics, so embryology, chemistry, physics, with all of the lecturers that also taught into the UWA medical program. So later, once we were actually offered a spot in, once we proved that we were sort of capable of studying and that we were ready, we knew and familiar with not only the physical space, but also the people who taught into the degree. So if you're feeling a bit shame, you needed to ask some questions. It's like, I've just spent 6 weeks with the coordinator of human biology. I can just go in and get a bit of help that way. So it was really good. Developed connections with my peers who also did the 6-week course. We developed really strong relationships with our mentors. So at UWA there's a Shenton House, which is an actual house on campus where all the Aboriginal doctors, non-Aboriginal doctors in the field, student support services, scholarship officers, ITAS coordinators are all in the one spot. So whatever you needed, and myself and my colleagues, we all came from very different backgrounds, different ages, different obligations at home. So we needed different things from different people, but it was all provided for in that one spot, which is probably the number one reason that I got through into medicine. So that was a really good way of not just preparing us for the degree, but for strengthening our bonds with the people who were around us and our fellow colleagues. So once we got into medicine, so that was the process, getting the opportunity in. But once we were in, the things that worked really well, because it's such a, as you know, an intense degree, we were linked up with ITAS support, with AIDA, with networks before we even started. And we had opportunities throughout the 6 years to do Aboriginal health experience and placements. So we weren't just learning clinical through a mainstream lens, but we also got to have opportunities to develop our knowledge in Aboriginal health and to have community-based experiences. So that was the Aboriginal Health Specialisation Program that offered an alternate way of looking at medicine that made sense, and that also developed our skills when people were coming to us to ask us questions that maybe we weren't quite ready for because we were still learners at the time. And our mentors and our staff at Shenton House, Dr. Days one, and there was other doctors, Dr. Paul Edgell, who would tell us, your role as students, you're not there to teach, you're there to learn, and that's our role. So we knew we were always supported, no matter if it was curriculum or if it was social things that were going on at the time. So those were key successes. I think for us as students, we're very lucky to have the opportunities to have those supports in place. And I feel like that is where we're looking at in terms of Adelaide Uni, around not just removing barriers to enable access for people to actually get into medicine, see that it's not just about whether you can pass tests, but it's how do we holistically assess your capacity, your capabilities beyond one single test result. How do we know if you're ready? So how do we build relationships with you before you come into medicine so we know what you need and we can set you up before you start so we've got you strong? But also, how does the curriculum, and it's not just the formal curriculum, but that informal hidden curriculum, how is that designed in a way that protects Aboriginal students' identity and protects their well-being? And that's something I feel like the curriculum plays a key role in enabling success and retention of Aboriginal students. Yeah, that's what I have. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrea. Beautifully articulated some of the issues there. You know, we know people like Dr. Dave, Paul, have done things very well in the West for quite some time, and it's about building a cohort. It's about building identity. It's about giving people what you were talking about, and to start off their studies and to hold them in their studies. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions, so there's 2 mics, I think. I'd like to throw it open to people who'd like to question our illustrious panel. Anything, or make a comment that's relevant. So any questions? Would you please put your hand up and we'll get a mic to you? We'll get a mic to you. Thanks. Would you identify yourself and your question as well?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Abraham Quad from Flinders University, based in Redmark. To all the presenters, it's amazing and inspiring. I identified as some of you who was born in a rural area in Africa before I migrated here. One thing that has struck me is, and it's the experience I have from overseas, is once you break out of that bondage, you become a role model. So what is the success story out of your story in terms of inspiring the children from your communities? Are there more students interested in enrolling to become doctors?
Both mics should be live. If anyone would like to pick up the question, what is it in terms of your own communities you'd say will inspire the next generation of students? Is something like that?
Yeah. Are there more students now?
Yeah. Any care to comment?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. If I could just say that, I mean, in terms of the numbers, as Dennis had pointed out before, the numbers are starting to, dwindle a bit in terms of students coming through. We've had this, influx and this growth and this trend, but the numbers have slowed down a bit in terms of students coming through. In terms of how and what we contribute, and I'm sure the others will say the same, is that being in the community, being part of the community, and the community understanding what your role is, certainly, highlights and, helps to spark or keep the flame alight and spark it up a bit more and help to, I guess, turn the tap on a bit more so that we do get that supply. But those sort of things, we can't just rely on that. There's a whole lot of structural stuff that needs to happen in terms of how we better engage and get students into programs. So one is inspiring them, but also needing to have the right, as it's been pointed out before, the right preparation in terms of, what prerequisites they need. And those sort of things are work that needs to be done, I think, and something that we need to do a bit more of, where universities and school engage a lot more closely in terms of how we can better prepare students to then make that next step and be able to have the qualifications and the prerequisites for that. But in terms of the impact, it's inspiring. And I think I will touch on some of this tomorrow in a presentation around community engagement. But for those of you who are wondering what you're going to be doing tomorrow, you might want to come along to that session. But there's some, I guess one example is there's a student that graduated through JCU, Lisa Wire, Torres Strait Islander girl from Bamaga, which is a small remote community in northern part of Australia, Queensland. But her connection is through to a remote island community in the Torres Strait. But the thing that stands out for me, when you look at this photo of her at graduation day, there's about 25 people, all right, family members and extended family members in this photo. So you can see the sort of impact that, this one student has, this direct impact in terms of family. So you imagine that in a community like, place like Bamaga, of about 1,000, people. So you can see how the flow and effect of that would stem as a result of that. Thank you.
You can also think it's about developing those support networks around you. There are a number of students here at the moment who, like I've given my email to and things like that, have any issues, flick me an email. We've all been there. We all know how difficult it is, and some of the barriers that you're going to come up against, but just having that support network around you, and also think also being known in that community and telling a little bit about your history and your story. So, for example, myself, we went to a local high school careers day that was specifically for the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids, and one of the students there got up and he said, "My mum told stories about you being in detention during most of high school." And I went, "Yeah, that would be true." but it just adds a human element to it. Going, "Yep, all good. We've all got stories." But having said that, you then make a connection with in particular this chap. Say, "Look, yep, can be done. Detention didn't do me any harm, obviously, but you help to develop those links that hopefully he can use later on when things get a little bit difficult to go, being there, mate. We'll work through it."
We've got time for about one, at the most two more questions, so I think up the back somewhere.
Thanks. Ruth Stewart from James Cook University and resident of the Torres Strait. One of the things that has always distressed me is a comment that a friend made who was a teacher. She moved from primary school teaching to secondary school teaching, and she said in that step she was really distressed by these bright, engaged children who transformed into disengaged, despairing adolescents. And what she pondered was what had turned them off. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people here would have different ideas, but I'm interested in the panel's comments about what is it, at what age do we need to be reaching out to Indigenous students, and how should we do that? How best can we do that?
Yes.
Well, I just have a few thoughts. Being the scientific director of the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health, we have a mentorship network, and the network right now is starting at graduate school, which is way too late, and we're actually encouraging the mentorship network to start engaging in high school kids, but I actually think we have to get in there in primary school. I mean, I think we have to start engaging really young. We have, as I said, I think that we have to have mentorship for them. We have to let them know that that they belong in the institutions. We at First Nations University, we used to have kindergarten kids come to what we had our medicine room, and let them know that space was for them, that they could be there, that this was their future. And I really believe we have to start that young.
I also wanted to comment on that. Part of it is that they need the support of their peers. They also need support of their elders. One of the things that I've committed myself to, even though I'm doing medicine, is someone came to me and they told me a story of how in high school these Indigenous boarding students were being teased and bullied. One of the Indigenous students were being questioned whether they were actually Indigenous because they didn't look black. And I said to the person who told me that, I said, look, let me go hang out with them. I understand, I call it my marketability as an Indigenous woman doing medicine, becoming a doctor, and the influence, my status holds when I go out there. And I'm not afraid to use it when it can benefit, the younger generation, because everyone should be allowed to dream. And it's just unfortunate that sometimes dreams are lost in the way that the society as a whole treat, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within our communities.
We're running out of time. I've been asked to quickly whip around the panel and say, is there something you'd like to say or see that would bring about some particular positive change or some elements you think are missing very quickly, if you could just from you first, Donald.
Okay, thanks, Dennis.
Not to put you on the spot.
When I got in line to walk out, halfway across I thought I shouldn't have gotten first, because then I'll end up on the end. And anyway, but the whole green room and all that sort of stuff throws me off too. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, from my point of view, look, I think we touched on the bit about how we can better, influence students at school. Secondary school is an area that's certainly something that needs to be done. But I guess in order to do that, because, as institutions, we're not in every place, in every community, but working collaboratively with local health services, I think is the key thing that we need to be doing. We do that, of course, for, through clinical schools where we have students on board, they're part of our program, they're engaged with clinical schools, but I think we need to take that arrangement and take it outside into communities and schools, working through health services, and that's through, Aboriginal community control health services, but also through, the public system too, in getting information about careers, about employment, and about, the role models and those sort of things out in community. But as we know that, it doesn't just rely on one strategy. There's not one single bow that we can draw and create change. There's also, because Indigenous numbers, in this country, we're talking 3%. It's a very small part of the population. So quite easily can be forgotten. So it's important that we make sure that we build and maintain some critical mass. Now, we're not going to do this in, a medical degree or a health, qualification or health disciplines, but we need to approach this as a whole. So across the whole university and across many different disciplines, we're bringing those people together through a central arrangement or a centre is the sort of thing that builds that critical mass. And I think that, when you get that right, then there's a lot more engaging, a lot more interaction across students, across disciplines that build, I guess, inspire people to, to want to go on and achieve what they've started off doing is wanting to have a degree, they've enrolled in it, and making sure that they get through it, but having that critical mass to support individuals and each other. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to give you my student campaign spiel that I did last year at student elections. The reason why I'm here as Indigenous officer, as a medical student, I understand the socio health and, the well-being of the Indigenous population. So university needs to be a safe space, a fun space for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to achieve their academic dreams, because once they graduate and get out there, they become the ripple effect of change. They become the role models that the younger generation look up to. So we need to have more Indigenous people graduating through universities, getting out there and being the role models, and this is what we need here in Australia. So if you can be a role model for or advocate for any Indigenous student, or whether it be in medicine, whether it be a junior doctor, help them achieve their dreams, because they're the role models to our younger generations.
Thanks, Sherry.
It's about support, it's about encouragement, and I think in summary we start a lot of programs and we put a lot of things in place, and there's a celebration when it's the first of something, and agreed that is important, but I think it's important that it's not the last. As Yachi said, having that ripple effect in community, encouraging someone else to actually follow it and to take a leap of faith.
I'll just quickly building from what everyone else has said, I think if there's any solutions or ways forward, that it's done in a way that values and privileges Aboriginal knowledges and Aboriginal ways of working, so that people are making decisions aligned with what the community want in the way that they want it done.
So
I certainly echo everything that has already been said. The only thing that I will say is that we've been working in Canada, and I sit on the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only non-physician on that committee. But we've been really working on curriculum, and not just for academia and trying to get more Indigenous curriculum embedded into medical schools, but also for current physicians. And I think that is still something that we're woefully lacking at, culturally safe curriculum, ensuring that the academy isn't having just, I've heard that, sometimes there's only, an hour allocated for Indigenous curriculum, and that is unacceptable. And I think we have to work a lot harder to ensure that Indigenous curriculum is appropriately allocated into medical curriculum, not only for medical students, but continued education for physicians. And in terms of particularly anti-racism curriculum as well. I mean, we have to start to, unfortunately, not to be the downer at the end of this, but I mean, systemic racism exists, and we really have to start to address this. And I think curriculum is one way to do that. And so I think that's something that we have to start to really give some appropriate attention to. So I'll end with that. Miigwech.
It's not a downer, it's absolutely vital. Before, I'd ask you, would you mind just staying there for a sec? We have a small presentation that I'd like to bring on in a sec, but before we do that, would you please thank the panel for what's been a great session. Thank you so much. Just before we conclude this session, I'd like to invite Tim Pyle to come on and make a small presentation to Janine Greenhill. Tim is Secretary-Treasurer of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Tim. And Janine.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. I asked for a minute here to do a small presentation on behalf of the Métis Nation of Ontario. The Métis are one of the constitutionally recognized Indigenous people of Canada with the First Nations and the Inuit. And when I talked to Dr. Strasser, I said, not only do I want to come here and do my presentation on a Métis 101, by the way, which is at 10:30 tomorrow, if you want to join me. I said, I want to look at how we can engage and how we can work together with possibly Flinders or other universities in Australia, possibly student exchanges or whatever. I must say I was totally engaged with Dennis yesterday, Janine, Ken, and Donna, and boy, we hit it off right this morning. So just on behalf of the Métis Nation of Ontario, I want to present Janine just a small token of our appreciation. And in here I wrote, and I also put my business card in here so they can contact me, but just as a resource material for Flinders University, I just put, please accept this book as a resource to learn more about the Métis values and traditions. This will be a start to a new relationship between the Métis Nation of Ontario and Flinders University. Sincerely, Tim Pyle. So,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks, Tim. This is a really important and enduring relationship that we've got between Flinders and NOSM, and the people of the Métis people are a really important part of that. And Tim, I'd like to personally thank you for inspiring our Aboriginal academics that are hardworking and really trying to lift their spirits in the hard work that they do. So I really appreciate this gift. Thank you very much. It means a lot. So now I'd like to just call out our students who are going to give the thank you gifts. So Galina and Damien are going to give the thank you gifts to our wonderful Aboriginal panel guest speakers. Who have we got first? Have you got? Yep. So here's Damien. Off you go. Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, Carrie. Thank you very, very much. That was amazing. You made us all cry. Thank you, Andrea. I love Andrea's practical wisdom. And Justin. The world's a better place because of Justin and his clan. And thank you, Yaraji. And good luck with the rest of your studies. You're going to be an awesome doctor. I can't wait. And thank you, Donald. And so this is a wonderful partnership across the globe and across Australia. And thank you all very much. Dennis, we really enjoyed that session. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.